Good morning. It's Wednesday, April 30th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 572 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back yet again to the FDD Morning Brief. It's Yom HaZikaron, or Remembrance Day in Israel today. The country is commemorating their fallen soldiers and victims of terror. Sadly, those numbers have swelled over the last 572 days. 319 soldiers and 79 civilians have been killed in the last year alone amidst Israel's ongoing multi-front war. And those numbers are only likely to grow more as Jerusalem vows to fight on against Tehran and its proxies. We're going to continue to hope and pray for the end of this war. That said, it needs to end on the right terms. Our guest today is former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. During the first Trump administration, Ambassador Friedman played a key role in relocating the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and he was instrumental in negotiating the Abraham Accords. He's also the author of 2 books, including his latest, One Jewish State, The Last Best Hope to Resolve the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict. I caught up with the ambassador yesterday for a fast-paced conversation covering the U.S.-Iran nuclear talks, Abraham Accords expansion, two-state solution paradigm, and much more. So stay tuned. Our discussion is coming your way right after I share a few thoughts of my own. Israel turns 77 tomorrow. That's no small feat given the number of enemies surrounding this tiny country and the number of times it has been thrust into war. I've visited Israel countless times since the 1980s. I lived there for 2.5 years as a graduate student. So you might say I know the place pretty well. Turns out I don't know jack because I never witnessed the country at war. Not like this. So sure, I've seen some terrible things, Hamas bombings in the 1990s and the outbreak of the Second Intifada in September 2000. Those are things I'll never forget. Ditto, the Hamas rocket wars of 2012 and 2014 that forced me and my colleagues to run for shelter. But this war has forever changed the way I view the country. October 7th was an assault not only on the families of the fallen and the hostages, this was next level trauma for the country. And my heart aches for a people that want nothing more than to live in peace. Look, I get that not every Israeli policy is in pursuit of that peace, but these policies are an unfortunate outgrowth of a war that began 77 years ago, and that war never really ended, so the Israelis continue to soldier on. They have no choice. The people of Israel remember their fallen today just before they celebrate their 77th Independence Day. It's a meaningful few days by any measure, but it's even more meaningful now in the wake of the October 7 massacre and the ensuing war. The fight continues. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, the Houthis just scored their first big win against America. The Navy lost a $60 million fighter jet because of Houthi missile attack. The jet was aboard the USS Harry S. Truman. That's an aircraft carrier that's been in the thick of the American campaign against the Houthis. On Monday, the Truman was forced to make a sharp turn to avoid Houthi fire, and the jet fell overboard. So did a tow tractor. The jet was an F-18 Super Hornet. Those aircraft reportedly cost somewhere between $60 and $70 million a pop. So that's a lot of hard-earned taxpayer dollars now sitting at the bottom of the Red Sea. The good news is that the Navy said all personnel aboard the ship are accounted for, and the Truman remains fully mission capable. One sailor did sustain minor injuries. We're wishing them a full recovery. Headline 2, an Israeli district court sentenced an Israeli citizen to 10 years in prison. The reason is treason. The convict's name is Mordechai Maman. He's 72 years old. In December, Israeli authorities convicted him after he admitted that he had contact with a foreign agent and entered an enemy country without authorization. Yep, you guessed it, we're talking about Iran. Last year, Maman was reportedly smuggled into Iran to meet with a businessman named Eddie. Maman came in contact with Eddie through Turkish intermediaries. Maman, Eddie, and a third person who identified himself as a member of Iran's security forces discussed various espionage missions against Israel. Then, in August, Maman was smuggled into Iran a second time via an overland route through Turkey. That's when Maman and his handlers talked about assassinating Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, Shin Bet chief Ronen Bar, who's now on his way out, and then Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who has since stepped down. Folks, we'll be talking about Iran here, obviously, but what do we know about the Turkish angle? You know, I got to be in my bonnet when it comes to that regime. I think we need to learn more. Headline 3, sectarian clashes broke out near Damascus in what people are still calling the new Syria. At about midnight on Monday, fighting erupted between Syrian Druze and pro-government fighters. The violence reportedly started after an audio clip of a man cursing the Prophet Muhammad circulated on social media. The recording, which was attributed to a Druze cleric, set off Sunni Muslim jihadi fighters who then assaulted a predominantly Druze town south of Damascus. By Tuesday, at least a dozen people had been killed, including 2 members of Syria's General Security Service. That's a new security force comprised mostly of former jihadi fighters. A spokesperson for the Syrian Interior Ministry later denied that Sunni gunmen had attacked the Druze town. Instead, he claimed that Druze gunmen opened fire on a civilian protest. Syrian officials met with Druze leaders yesterday in an attempt to broker calm. All of this is just a reminder that you can call these guys Nusra Front, or you can call them Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or you can call them HTS, or you can call them the Syrian government, but they are still jihadis. Don't believe the hype. All right, it's time to press play now on my conversation with former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. His efforts to promote a safer and more stable future for Israel, including his role in negotiating the Abraham Accords, have had positive ripple effects across the region. I met up with him in Jerusalem a few weeks ago, and he agreed to be a guest on our program. So sit back, relax, and have a listen. Welcome to the program, Ambassador David Friedman.
Jonathan, great to be with you.
All right. Well, great to have you here. I want to congratulate you. You got a new book out. I've reviewed it. It's called One Jewish State. That's, of course, your second book. Your first one was called Sledgehammer. Maybe if you want to just give us a little bit about what is in your new book, why you wrote it, and why you wrote it now.
Well, One Jewish State is, as you might imagine, is a book which advocates for one Jewish state, for a single Jewish state, if you will, from the river to the sea, which means that it would contemplate Israeli sovereignty over all of biblical Israel, including Judea and Samaria. And I think the thesis of the book is as follows. Everybody has an opinion about the Middle East. Everybody's got an opinion about Israel. Some people look at it theologically. Some people look at it in terms of geopolitics. Some people think about human rights. Some people think about bringing prosperity to the region. What One Jewish State argues is no matter how you view this, no matter how you prioritize those issues or other issues, the best outcome, not just for Jews in Israel, but the best outcome for everybody living in this region is for Israeli sovereignty over the entirety of Judea and Samaria, over the West Bank. It's only Israel, my argument goes, and I think I do a decent job of making the case. Only Israel has a track record of empowering minorities, empowering in particular Arab minorities. Almost 20% of Israel is Arab. More than 20% of the most elite universities in Israel are Arab students. I mean, Arabs have ascended in Israel to the heights of commerce and the professions and politics. So the idea is that Israel is really the only country that can do it, that's willing to do it. And of course, kind of the cherry on top for those who care about this, as I do, is that it's also God's will. It's also consistent with the covenants that God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's consistent with the prophecies of Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Isaiah. And so maybe the punchline of the book is, why would anybody be surprised that fulfilling God's will actually achieves the best outcome for all the human beings, all the inhabitants of this troubled region? And that's the case of One Jewish State.
All right, so we're talking about. By the way, I read it. I thought it was really interesting the way you spoke about how the West Bank could be sort of like Puerto Rico, that Judea and Samaria could be a kind of a quasi-independent territory, but under the sovereignty of Israel. And I think you made a persuasive case, maybe not one that everybody's going to agree with, but I think you make it in a unique way. And I think that really is the value or one of the great values of the book. But, I think this leads me to another question, which is, Israel's need for expanded territory. I know that you were heavily involved in the discussions about the annexation of the Golan Heights. That was one of the major successes. We'll talk about one of your other successes momentarily, but that was a major success of yours during the previous Trump administration. Why does Israel need to expand territory, in your view?
Well, I think it's I think there's a whole host of regions, and I think it's true in Judea and Samaria. It's true in the Golan Heights. I mean, first of all, there's national security, right? I mean, every country has to have defensible borders, right? I mean, that was actually the core of the agreement back in 1967, which is the only agreement that all the countries agreed to in UN Security Council Resolution 242. Israel has to have recognized and defensible borders. So without Judea and Samaria, Israel at its narrowest point is less than 9 miles wide. It can be split in half relatively easily. And more important, it's not just the quantum of land, but the nature of the land. I've spoken to many defense experts, and you're certainly one of them. What I'm told, because I'm not a defense expert, but I've studied it, is that for throughout history, and really things haven't changed with all our technology, things really haven't changed. Given how narrow Israel is, if it's not on the mountains, if it's not on the top, looking down on its potential enemies, it really can't defend itself. And so whether it's the Golan Heights or it's the mountains of Judea and Samaria looking down on Jordan and looking up at Syria, I mean, these are the critical geographical bases that Israel must control in order to be able to defend itself. So that's the basic thing. But then you have related issues, like you got a lot of people living there, right? And a lot of them aren't happy. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But who's going to turn this area into a place which is livable, which has opportunity and prosperity? So as I said earlier, Israel is the only country that can do that. Now, look, the Golan has been a successful first step. I mean, Israel annexed the Golan back in 1981, but America, under the Trump administration, we recognized that sovereignty in 2019. Nothing bad happened, right? If anything, I think Israel and its allies have been safer, with regard to what's been happening in Syria because of the Golan Heights, and Israel's even now in this war moved a little further north, just temporarily to protect itself. So, look, the Golan Heights is different. Golan Heights doesn't have a large Palestinian population. The Judea and Samaria does, and obviously there are different considerations, but. This is not about, just acquiring territory for its own sake. I mean, this is, kind of repatriating territory, which, in which Israel has ancient roots, in which Israel has, the best legal claim, based upon not the Bible, but based upon, the San Remo Conference and the views of our, Undersecretary of State, back in the 1960s, Eugene Rostow, he was the dean of the Yale Law School. He thought Israel had the best claim to the West Bank. So it fits in with both the legal requirements, the defensive requirements, the socioeconomic requirements. It's just the best outcome. And people have been trying for some 50 plus years to come up with a different outcome, and it's been not just a failure, but it's been a failure that's brought nothing but violence and misery.
Yeah, and of course, you're talking there about two-state solution, which has not been a terrific solution at all. A lot of people say it's the only paradigm. I think there are a lot of folks that would say that it is a failed paradigm, and I guess that debate continues. But let me pivot to your other, real serious success from the previous Trump administration, right? We talked about the Golan Heights. That was a big one. But then there's the Abraham Accords, right? And I know you were heavily involved in that. You helped to broker the normalization agreements between the UAE and Bahrain and Israel, as well as Morocco and Sudan, which, of course, that one's a bit more touch and go right now. But the vast majority of them have held. So the question that everyone's asking now, who goes next? Mm-hmm. Can we actually build on the Abraham Accords? I mean, there are many who would say that we had the Saudis on the 5-yard line, and that Trump's loss to Biden really set us back by years. We're now 4 or 5 years and counting, which was obviously a real shame. But in your estimation, do you think that we can get the Saudis back on side, Or are there other countries that you think are in line right now to join the Abraham Accords?
Well, look, they're going to expand. I mean, there's no question about it. I'm not sure you can rush it. You can't rush it before it's fully baked, and doesn't make it any easier with the war going on and the streets kind of aflame in part of the Arab world. Although interestingly enough, most of these Arab countries, their streets are far less aflame than the U.S. and the U.K. and France. So I think maybe our college campuses in Western Europe are the places that we'd have the hardest time making a deal with. The Saudis will come on board. I can't tell you when. I think Indonesia probably is a good bet, which is the largest has the largest Muslim population in the world. And then we'll see others as well. Once the dominoes start to fall, they're going to fall quickly. Now, here's what I think is worth observing about the Abraham Accords. The first thing is, remember, most of the people that are most of the countries that are parties to the Abraham Accord, they're people. Most of them get their news from Al Jazeera, right? And Al Jazeera has been doing nothing but promoting the notion that Israelis are baby killers, right? They just go out and kill babies, right? A horrible, horrible lie, totally untrue, inconsistent with, every, objective analysis, but that's what people see. So you would think, right, if ever there were a time for one of these countries to look us in the eye or look Israel in the eye and say, look, guys, it's not us, but we got a street to deal with, okay? And they're aflame. They don't want us having anything to do with you right now. So we got to pause these Abraham Accords. Maybe there'll become a time we can come back and do it. Now would be the time for that to happen, right? And it didn't happen. Okay, so that tells you, like, if we can survive the last year and a half, given the incredible, libels that have been thrown at Israel, that have been absorbed into, the traditional Arab culture, we're going to survive this. That's for sure. Now the question is, what's the real motivation? So, like, all these countries want their own things. I mean, everybody's got asks, of the United States. And these are kind of delicate in one-off negotiations, every one of them. But there's a common theme, and I think this was a point made by the foreign minister of the UAE when I met with him, and I said to him, what do you think is the main, what is it that kind of solidifies our relationships here? And he said, look, the Abraham Accords, in a nutshell, is a victory of the moderates over the extremists. That's all this is. That's all it is. And it doesn't matter what country you're in. You can be in America, you can be in Israel, you can be in any of these Gulf countries. We all have extremists, okay? They all threaten us. They all threaten our governments, And the Abraham Accords is a shot across the bow to all of them, saying, you know what? You're not going to win. Your views are not in line with any of these governments. They're not in line with where we want to take our countries. And that I thought was very profound, but also, I mean, that motivation continues to exist today, probably in greater force than it did, back in 2020 when we did the first round of Abraham Accords. I think a lot of these countries, more than ever, want to send a message that extremists are not welcome, and I think that makes me pretty optimistic about all this.
Yeah, I think me too. I like how they've held, and I like that this is still a topic of conversation. Wish the Saudis were a little closer, but I guess we got to play the long game. Last question before I let you go. We're watching a lot of things happen right now. First 100 days of the Trump administration, I mean, just a whirlwind, right? And amongst those things, we've seen some things that I think we've all cheered, right? The president was able to negotiate a hostage deal, got a bunch of Israeli hostages home. Supporting the Israelis with the weapons that they need, and diplomatically giving them full cover. However, same time, negotiating with the Iranians. How do you interpret what's going on here? Should we be panicking at this point about what's going on, or you think that Trump has a plan?
Well, look, I think he has a plan, and I honestly don't know, what the bids and the asks are in these discussions. I'm not in the room, but remember one thing. We started with a baseline, which was the JCPOA, right? And President Trump correctly got us out of that deal and said it was the worst diplomatic agreement that he'd ever seen, right? So I'm not all that concerned that we're going to go back to that. People are saying we're going back to the old, Obama 2.0. I don't see how. I mean, that seems to me completely inconsistent with what the president's been saying for 8 years or longer. So, look, I think he obviously has a preference for a diplomatic outcome. I think he knows that the Iranians are not trustworthy. I mean, I think clearly that's the case. When I was a lawyer, I had clients, who made deals with really trustworthy people, and I used to, not worry about the deals that much. And then I had these incredibly untrustworthy people, which you handle differently, and you protect yourself differently, and you make sure you have, that you won't get fooled again. To quote one of my favorite bands, and that's what that's what you do. Now, I mean, I think everyone's going into this with their eyes wide open. I just don't know enough to comment on it. I mean, I won't be shy if I think it's not the right deal. But I'm certainly not there yet. And I can't say that a good deal is not better than a war. A good deal is better than a war. The question is, can you get to a good deal? And as I said, I don't trust the Iranians as far as I can throw them. And so it's to be determined. I just think we're a little early on to have this to really form any conclusions about this issue.
All right. Well, we're going to keep watching those talks out of Oman. In the meantime, I want to thank you, Ambassador David Friedman, for joining us today on the FDD Morning Brief.
Well, Jonathan, it's great talking to you. Really enjoyed the conversation.
You too. All right, here's what FTD has on tap for you today. My colleagues Juan Zarate and Elaine Dezensky have a new piece out in Foreign Policy analyzing how President Trump's tariffs and the 90-day pause applied to most of them present a strategic opportunity for the White House to pursue trade and investment agreements with key partner nations. The goal, to build new economic alliances that can isolate China and other adversaries of the United States. That sounds pretty good to me, even as I watch that 401k. Yee. Okay, meanwhile, my colleague David May has teamed up with FDD intern Jake Schanzer on an important piece on FDD's website, spotlighting 5 wasteful and harmful UN organizations that undermine Israel's legitimacy. While UNRWA obviously made the cut, the piece also exposes several lesser-known UN entities that have caused significant damage. If you're concerned about the UN's bias or just want to get your blood boiling, I highly recommend you give that a read. Lastly, don't miss the latest edition of FDD's Trump administration foreign policy tracker, examining the administration's foreign policy during the first 100 days of Trump's second term. It includes trend lines ranging from very positive to neutral to negative to very negative. For each major region and issue that we monitor, visit our site to read the full analysis. We call them as we see them, and that's what matters in the end. All right, folks, it is time for me to skedaddle. Get smarter on foreign policy by reading us on X, YouTube, Instagram, and of course our website. Please support our mission by making a tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Friday for another riveting, exciting, thrilling episode of the FDD Morning Brief. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer signing off for FDD.